New, I want to read. I want to read books like all the time, like every day. I want to read so much, but I always find other things to do because I'm a busy man. So I figured, hey, why don't I read a book, record it, share it with you guys, share some ideas from some books that I also want to read, right? And hopefully, if you like it enough, you'll go and buy it yourself and, support libraries or something. I don't know. But here's a book. I don't have it linked anywhere. Maybe I should do that eventually. I probably will, but not right now. Today, I'm going to start reading the book Anarchy, State, and Utopia by Robert Nozick. Here's the picture if you're watching this on the YouTube or the Facebook or the Twitch. Here you go. This is what it looks like. I'm going to read it. I do need your help because I like to make other things. If you can help me stay focused and come every day to read you a nighttime story, I would be so happy if you would come and just say, "Hey, Andre, you gonna read me that book again?" I'd be like, "Oh, yeah. I'm not gonna let you down. I don't want to let you down." So just, I don't know, pester me a little bit. We all need a push, and I'm asking you for a push with this because I'd like to read a book every day. Okay? So just give me a push. But today I'm gonna start reading it. I'm gonna do it maybe for about an hour, however long, until I get tired. But let's jump in. Again, Anarchy, State, and Utopia by Robert Nozick. I found out about this book on Philosophize This podcast. It's an amazing podcast. I think everybody should listen to it. It is gold. So let's say this video is sponsored by Philosophize This podcast. If you ever wanting to explore the depths of thought, of intellectual thought, or just what is even happening in your life, Philosophize This podcast goes through all the major philosophers up until this point and shares with you the ideas of these thinkers that were paid to think, that were teaching other people to think all throughout history. So there's always something for you to attach yourself to understand, oh, somebody's thought about this, thought it through, and I could take a piece of it to apply to my own life, to make it simpler, to make it easier, to make it more understandable. So that way you don't have to sit and squirm. The answers are right there. And I think that there's a lot of answers and comedy on Philosophize This podcast. You should go and jump on that, listen to it. And there you'll find him talking about this individual and this book in a half hour episode. That's how I got hooked on this. So now I'm going to read the book for you. But if you don't want to listen to me read the book, go listen to Philosophize This podcast. You will get interested, and then you can come back and listen to me read the book. Okay? I will begin. Preface, or preface, whichever one you like. Individuals have rights, and there are things no person or group may do to them without violating their rights. So strong and far-reaching are these rights that they raise the question of what, if anything, the state and its official may do. How do room How much room do individual rights leave for the state? The nature of the state, its legitimate functions, and its justifications, if any, is a central concern of this book. A wide and diverse variety of topics intertwine in the course of our investigation. Our main conclusions about the state are that a minimal state, limited to the narrow functions of protection against force, theft, fraud, enforcement of contracts, and so on, is justified. That any more extensive state will violate persons' rights not to be forced to do certain things and is unjustified. And that the minimal state is inspiring as well as right. Two noteworthy implications are that the state may not use its coercive apparatus for the purpose of getting some citizens to aid others, or in order to prohibit activities to people for their own good or protection. Despite the fact that it is only coercive routes toward these goals that are excluded, while voluntary ones remain, many persons will reject our conclusions instantly, knowing that they don't want to believe anything so apparently callous toward the need and suffering of others. I know that reaction. It was mine when I first began to consider such views. With reluctance, I found myself becoming convinced of, as they are now often called, libertarian ways. due to various consideration and arguments. This book contains little evidence of my earlier reluctance. Indeed, instead, it contains many of the considerations and arguments which I present as forcefully as I can. Thereby, I run the risk of offending doubt doubly, for the position expounded and for the fact that I produce reasons to support this position. My earlier reluctance is not present in this volume because it has disappeared. Over time, I have grown accustomed to the views and their consequences, and now see the political realm through them. Should I say that they enable me to see through the political realm? Since many of the people who take a similar position are narrow and rigid and filled, paradoxically, with resentment and other freer ways of being, my now having natural responses which fit the theory puts me in some bad company. I do not welcome the fact that some people, most people I know and respect, disagree with me, having outgrown the not wholly admirable pleasure of irritating or dumbfounding people by producing strong reasons to support position they dislike or even detest. I write in the mode of much contemporary philosophical work in epistemology or metaphysics. There are elaborate arguments, claims rebutted by unlikely counterexamples, surprising theses, puzzles, abstract structural conditions, challenges to find another theory which fits a specified range of cases, startling conclusions, and so on. Though this makes for intellectual interest and excitement, I hope, some may feel that the truth about ethics and political philosophy is too serious and important to be obtained by such flashy tools. Nevertheless, it may be that correctness in ethics is not found in what we naturally think. A codification of the received view of an explanation of accepted principles need not use elaborate arguments. It is thought to be an objection to other views merely to point out that they conflict with the views which readers wish anyway to accept. But a view which differs from the readers cannot argue for itself merely by pointing out that the received view conflicts with it. Instead, it will have to subject the received view to the greatest intellectual testing and strain via counter-arguments, scrutiny of its presuppositions, and presentations of a range of possible situations where even its proponents are uncomfortable with its consequences. I don't know what's happening. Maybe it's the Rona. Even the reader, unconvinced by my arguments, should find that, in the process of maintaining and supporting his view, he has clarified and deepened it. Moreover, I'd like to think intellectual honesty demands that, occasionally, at least, we go out of our way to confront strong arguments opposed to our view. How else are we to protect ourselves from continuing in error? It seems only fair to remind the reader that intellectual honesty has its dangers. Arguments read perhaps at first in curious fascinations may come to convince and even to seem natural and intuitive. Only the refusal to listen guarantees one against being ensnared by the truth. The contents of this volume are its particular arguments. Still, I can indicate further what is to come. Since I begin with a strong formulation of individual rights, I treat seriously the anarchist claim that in the course of maintaining its monopoly on the use of force and protecting everyone within a territory, the state must violate individuals' rights, and hence it intrinsically immoral. Against this claim, I argue that a state would arise from anarchy, as represented by Locke's state of nature, even though no one intended this or tried to bring it about by a process which need not violate anyone's rights. Pursuing this central argument of Part 1 leads through a diversity of issues. These include why moral views involve side constraints of action rather than merely being goal-oriented, the treatment of animals, why it is so satisfying to explain complicated patterns as arising by process in which no one intended them, the reason why some actions are prohibited rather than allowed provided compensation is paid to their victims, the non-existence of the deterrence theory of punishment, issues about prohibiting risky actions, Herbert Hart's so-called principle of fairness, preemptive attack, and preventative detention. These issues and others are brought to bear in investigating the nature and moral legitimacy of the state and of anarchy. Part 1 justifies the minimal state. Part 2 contends that no more extensive state can be justified. I process by arguing that a diversity of reason which purport to justify a more extensive state don't. Against the claim that such a state is justified in order to achieve or produce distributive justice among its citizens, I develop a theory of justice, the entitlement theory, which does not require any more extensive state, and use the apparatus of this theory to dissect and criticize other theories of distributive justice which do envisage a more extensive state, focusing especially on the recent powerful theory of John Rawls. Other reasons that some might think justify a more extensive state are criticized, excluding equality, envy, workers' control, and Marxian theories of exploitation. Readers who find Part 1 difficult should find Part 2 easier, with Chapter 8 easier than Chapter 7. Part 2 closes with a hypothetical description of how a more extensive state might arise, a tale designed to make such a state quite unattractive. Even if the minimal state is uniquely justifiable one, it may seem pale and unexciting, hardly something to inspire one or to present a goal worth fighting for. To assess this, I turn to the preemptively inspiring tradition of social thought, utopian theory, and argue that what can be saved from this tradition is precisely the structure of the minimal state. The argument involves a comparison of different methods of shaping a society, designs devices and filters devices, and the presentation of a model which invites application of the mathematical economist notion of the core of an economy. My emphasis upon the conclusions which diverge from what most readers believe may mislead one into thinking that this book is some sort of political tract. It is not. It is philosophical exploration of issues, many fascinating in their own right, which arise and interconnect when we consider individual rights and the state. The word exploration is appropriately chosen. One view about how to write a philosophy book holds that an author should think through all the details of the view he presents, and his problems, polishing and refining his views to present to the world a finished, complete, and elegant whole. This is not my view. At any rate, I believe that there's a place and function in our ongoing intellectual life for a less complete work, containing unfinished presentations, conjectures, open questions, and problems lead side connections, and as well as a main line of argument. There's a room for words on subjects other than last words. Indeed, the usual manner of presenting philosophical work puzzles me. Works on philosophy are written as though their authors believe them to be absolutely final word on subjects. But it is not. Surely, that each philosopher thinks that he finally, thank God, has found the truth and built an impregnable fortress around it. We're all actually much more modest than that, for good reason. Having thought long and hard about the view he proposes, a philosopher has a reasonably good idea about its weak points, the places where great intellectual weight is placed upon something perhaps too fragile to bear it, the places where the unraveling of view might begin, and unprobed assumptions he feels uneasy about. One form of philosophical activity feels like pushing and shoving things to fit into some fixed perimeter of specified shape. All those things are lying out there, and they must be fit in. You push and shove the material into the rigid area, getting it into the boundary on one side, and it bulges out on another. You run around and press it in protruding bulge, producing yet another in another place. So you push and shove and clip off corners from the things so they fit, and you press it until finally almost everything sits unstably more or less in there. What doesn't get heaved far away so that it won't be noticed? Of course, it's not all that crude. There's also the coaxing and cajoling. And the body English. Quickly! You find an angle from which it looks like an exact fit and take a snapshot at a fast shutter speed before something else bulges out too noticeably. Then, back to the dark room to touch up the rents, rips, and tears in the fabrics of the perimeter. All that remains is to publish and photograph as a representation of exactly how things are, and to note how nothing fits properly into any other shape. No philosopher says, there's where I started, here's where I ended up. The major weakness in my work is that I went from there to here. In particular, here are the most notable distortions: pushing, shoving, mauling, gouging, stretching, chipping, and I committed during the trip. Not to mention the things thrown away and ignored, and all those averting of gazes. The reticence of philosophers about the weakness they perceived in their own views is not, I think, simply a question of philosophical honesty and integrity, though it is that, or at least becomes that, when brought to consciousness. The reticence, I don't know that word, the reticence is connected with philosophers' purposes in formulating views. Why do they strive to force everything into that one fixed perimeter? Why not another perimeter? Or more radically, why not leave the things where they are? What does having everything within a perimeter do for us? Why do we want it so? What does it shield us from? From these deep and frightening questions. I hope not to be able to manage to avert my gaze in future work. However, my reason for mentioning these issues here is not that I feel they pertain more strongly to the work than to other philosophical writings. What I say in this book is, I think, correct. This is not my way of taking it back. Rather, I propose to give it all to you, the doubts and worries and uncertainties, as well as the beliefs, convictions, and arguments. At those particular points in my argument, transitions, assumptions, and so forth, where I feel the strain, I try to comment, or at least to draw the reader's attention to what makes me uneasy. In advance, it is possible to voice some general theoretical worries. This book does not present a precise theory of the moral basis of individual rights. It does not contain a precise statement and justification of a theory of retributive punishment, or a precise statement of the principles of the tripartite theory of distributive justice it presents. Much of what I say rests upon or uses general features that I believe such theories would have where they worked out. I think I would like to write on these topics in the future. If I do, no doubt the resulting theory will differ from what I now expect it to be, and this would require some modification in the superstructure erected here. It would be foolish to expect that I shall complete these fundamental tasks satisfactorily, as it would be to remain silent upon until they are done. Perhaps this easy essay will stimulate others to help. Man, it's a lot of words. Reading in your mind is so much easier than reading out loud. But forward we press. We press onward. And I'm still trying to find a comfortable position that I can read, flip pages, still be heard in the microphone. Acknowledgements. I'm not going to read the acknowledgements. I'm going to read the acknowledgements. It's here. The first 9 chapters of this essay were written during 1971 to 1972, while I was a fellow at the Center of Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences at Palo Alto, a minimally structured academic institution bordering on the individualistic anarchy. I am very grateful to the center and its staff for providing an environment so conducive to getting things done. Chapter 10 was presented in a symposium on utopia and utopianism at a meeting of the Eastern Division of the American Philosophical Association in 1969. Some points from that delivered address appear scattered in other chapters. The whole manuscript was rewritten during the summer of 1973. Barbara Nozick's objections to some of the positions defined here helped me to sharpen my views. In addition, she helped enormously in innumerable other ways. Over several years, I have benefited from Michael Walzer's comments, questions, and counter-arguments as I tried out on him ideas on some topics of this essay. I have received detailed and very helpful written comments on the whole manuscript written at the Center from W.V. Quinn, Derek Parfit, and Gilbert Harmon, on Chapter 7 from John Rawls and Frank Michelman, and on an earlier draft of Part 1 from Alan Dershowitz. I also have benefited from a discussion with Ronald Dworkin on how competing protective agencies would or wouldn't work from Suggestions by Burton Dreben. Various stages of various portions of this manuscript were read and discussed over the years at meetings of the Society for Ethical and Legal Philosophy. The regular discussion with its members have been a source of intellectual stimulation and pleasure. It was a long conversation about 6 years ago with Murray Rothbard that stimulated my interest in individualist anarchy theory. Even longer ago, arguments with Bruce Goldberg led me to take libertarian views seriously enough to want to refute them, and so to pursue the subject further. The result is before the reader. Part 1. State of nature theory, or how to back into a state without really trying. Page 3, Chapter 1. Why state of nature theory? If the state did not exist, would it be necessary to invent it? Would one be needed? And would it have to be invented? These questions arise from political philosophy and for a theory explaining political phenomena, and are answered by investigating the state of nature, to use the terminology of traditional political theory. The justifications for resuscitating the archaic notion that have to be fruitfulness, interest, and far-reaching implication of the theory that results. For the less trusting reader, who desires some assurance in advance, this chapter discusses reasons why it is important to pursue state of nature theory. Reasons for thinking that theory would be a fruitful one. These reasons necessarily are somewhat abstract and metaphorical. The best reason is the developed theory itself. The fundamental question of political philosophy, one that precedes questions about how the state would be organized, is whether there should be any state at all. Why not have anarchy? Since anarchist theory, if tenable, undercuts the whole subject of political philosophy. It is appropriate to begin political philosophy with an examination of its major theoretical alternative. Those who consider anarchism not an unattractive doctrine will think it possible that political philosophy ends here as well. Others impatiently will await what is to come afterwards. Yet, as we shall see, anarchists and anarchists alike, archists and anarchists alike, those who spring gingerly from the starting point as well as those reluctantly argued away from it, can agree that beginning the subject of political philosophy with state of nature theory has an explanatory purpose. Such a purpose is absent when epistemology is begun with an attempt to refute the skeptic. Which anarchic situation should we investigate to answer the question of why not anarchy? Perhaps the one that would exist if the actual political situation didn't, while no other possible political one did. But apart from the gratuitous assumptions that everyone, everywhere, would be in the same non-state boat, and the enormous, unmanageability of pursuing the counterfactual to arrive at a particular situation, that situations would lack fundamental theoretical interest. To be sure, if that non-state situation were sufficiently awful, there would be a reason to refrain from dismantling or destroying a particular state and replacing it with none. Now, it would be more promising to focus upon a fundamental abstract description that would encompass all situations of interest, including, quote, where we would now be if, end quote. Were this description awful enough, the state would come out of a preferred alternative, viewed as affectionately as a trip to the dentist. Such awful descriptions rarely convince, and not merely because they fail to cheer. The subject of psychology and sociology are far too feeble to support generalizing so pessimistically across all societies and persons, especially since the argument depends upon not making such pessimistic assumptions about how the state operates. Of course, people know something of how actual states have operated, and they differ in their views. Given their enormous importance of the choice between the state and anarchy, caution might suggest one to use the minimax criterion and focus upon a pessimistic estimate of the non-state situation. The state would be compared with the most pessimistically described Hobbesian state of nature. I don't know that word. Hobbesan. Habeshan. I'm assuming it's a name. But in using the minimax criterion, the Hebestian situation should be compared with the most pessimistically described possible state, including future ones. Such a comparison, surely, the worst state of nature would win. Those who view the state as an abomination will not find minimax very compelling, especially since it seems one could always bring back the state if that came to seem desirable. The minimax criterion, on the other hand, would proceed on the most optimistic assumptions about how things would work out. Godwin, if you like that sort of thing. But imprudent optimism also lacks conviction. Indeed, no proposed decisions criterion for the choice under uncertainty carries convictions here, nor does maximizing expected utility on the basis of such frail probabilities. More to the point, especially for deciding what goals one should try to achieve, would be to focus upon a non state situation in which people generally satisfy moral constraints and generally act as they ought. Such an assumption is not wildly optimistic. It does not assume that all people act exactly as they should. Yet this state of nature situation is the best anarchaic situation one reasonably could hope for. Hence, investigating its nature and defects is of crucial importance to deciding whether there should be a state rather than anarchy. If one could show that the state would be superior even to this most favored situation of anarchy, the best that realistically can be hoped for, or would arise by a process involving no morally impermissible steps, or would be an improvement if it arose, this would provide a rationale for the state's existence. It would justify the state. Asterisk. This contrasts with a theory that presents a state's arising from a state of nature by a natural and inevitable process of deterioration, rather as medical theory presents aging or dying. Such a theory would not justify the states, though it might resign us to its existence. This investigation will raise the question of whether all the actions persons must do to set up and operate a state are themselves morally permissible. Some anarchists have claimed not merely that we would be better off without a state, but that any state necessarily violates people's moral rights, and hence it intrinsically immoral. Our starting point then, though non-political, is by intention far from non-moral. Moral philosophy sets the background for and boundaries of political philosophy. What persons may and may not do to one another limits what they may do through the apparatus of a state, or do to establish such an apparatus. The moral prohibition it is permissible to enforce are the sources of whatever legitimacy the state's fundamental coercive power has. Fundamental coercive power is power not resting upon any consent of the person to whom it is applied. This provides a primary arena of state activity, perhaps the only legitimate arena. Furthermore, to the extent moral philosophy is unclear and gives rise to disagreements in people's moral judgments, it also sets problems which one might think could be appropriately handled in the political arena. Explanatory political theory. In addition to its importance for political philosophy, the investigation of the state of nature also will serve explanatory purposes. The possible ways of understanding the political realm are as follows. 1. To fully explain it in terms of non-political. 2. To view it as emerging from the non-political but irreducible to it, a mode of organization of non-political factors understandable only in terms of novel political principles. Or 3. To view it as a completely autonomous realm, since only the first promises full understanding of the whole political realm, it stands as the most desirable theoretical alternative, to be abandoned only if known to be impossible. Let us call this most desirable and complete kind of explanation of realm a fundamental explanation of the realm. To explain fundamentally the political in terms of the non-political, one might start either with a non-political situation, showing how and why a political one later would arise out of it, or with a political situation that is described non-politically, deriving its political features from its non-political descriptions. This later, this latter derivation, derivation either will identify the political features with those features non-politically described, or will use scientific laws to connect distinct features. Except perhaps for this last mode, the illumination of the explanation will vary directly with the independent glow of the non-political starting point, be it in situation or description, and with the distance, real or apparent, of the starting point from its political result. The more fundamental the starting point, the more it picks out basic, important, and inescapable features of the human situation, and the less close it is or seems to its result, the less political and state-like it looks, the better. It would not increase understanding to reach the state from an arbitrary or otherwise unimportant starting point, obviously adjacent to it from the start. Whereas discovering the political features and relations were reducible to or identical with ostensibly very different non-political ones would be an exciting result. Were these features fundamental, the political realm would be firmly and deeply based. So far are we from such a major theoretical advance that prudence alone would recommend that we pursue the alternative of showing how a political situation would arise out of a non-political one, that is, that we begin a fundamental explanatory account with what is familiar within political philosophy as state of nature theory. A theory of a state of nature that begins with fundamental general descriptions of morally permissible and impermissible actions, and of deeply based reasons why some persons in any society would violate these moral constraints, and goes on to describe how a state would arise from that state of nature will serve our explanatory purposes, even if no actual state ever arose that way. Hempel has discussed the notion of a potential explanation, which intuitively and roughly is what would be the correct explanation if everything mentioned in it were true and operated. Let us say that a law-defective potential explanation is a potential explanation with a false law-like statement, and that a fact-defective potential explanation is potential explanation with a false anecdotal condition. A potential explanation that explains a phenomenon as a result of a process P will be defective, even though it is neither law defective nor fact detective. If some process Q other than P produced the phenomenon through P was capable of doing it. Had this other process Q not produced it, then P would have it. Asterisk. Or perhaps yet another process, R, would have it if Q hadn't. Through had R not produced the phenomenon, then P would have, or so the footnote sentence should read, P would have produced the phenomenon had no member of Q, R, blank, 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 done so. We ignore here the complication that would prevent Q from producing the phenomenon might also prevent P from doing so. Let us call a potential explanation that fails in this way actually to explain the phenomenon of a process-defective potential explanation. A fundamental potential explanation, an explanation that would explain the whole realm under consideration, where the actual explanation carries important explanatory illumination even if it is not the correct explanation. To see how, in principle, a whole realm could fundamentally be explained greatly increases our understanding of the realm. Footnote. This claim needs to be qualified. It will not increase our understanding of a realm to be told as a potential explanation what we know to be false, that by doing a certain dance, ghosts or witches or goblins made the realm that way. It is possible to think that an explanation of a realm must present an underlying mechanism yielding the realm, or do something else equally productive or understanding. But to say this is not to state precisely the deep conditions an underlying mechanism might satisfy to explain a realm. The precise qualifications of the claim as the text awaits advances in the theory of explanation. Yet other difficulties call for such advances. See Jae-Gwon Kim, Causations, Gnomic Subsumption, and the Concept of Event, The Journal of Philosophy, 70, number 8, April 26, 1973, page 217 through 236. It is difficult to say that more without examining types of cases. Indeed, without examining particular cases, but this we cannot do here. Defective fundamental potential explanations, in their false initiative conditions, could have been true, will carry great illuminations. Even wildly false initial conditions will illuminate, sometimes very greatly. Law defective fundamental potential explanations may illuminate the nature of a realm almost as well as the correct explanations, especially if the laws together form an interesting and integrated theory. In the process, defective fundamental potential explanations, which are neither law defective nor fact defective, fit our explanatory bill and propose almost perfectly. These things could not be said as strongly, if at all, about non-fundamental explanations. State of nature, explanation of these political realms are fundamental potential explanations of this realm and pack explanatory punch and illumination, even if incorrect. We learn much by seeing how the state could have arisen, even if it didn't arise that way. If it didn't arise that way, we also would learn much by determining why it didn't, by trying to explain why the particular bit of the real world that diverges from the state of nature model as it is. Since consideration both of this political philosophy and explanatory political theory converge upon Locke's state of nature, we shall begin with that. More accurately, we shall begin with individuals and something sufficiently similar to Locke's state of nature so that many of the otherwise important differences may be ignored here. Only when some divergence between our conceptions and Locke is relevant to political philosophy, to our argument about the state, will it be mentioned. The completely accurate statement of the moral background, including the precise state of the moral theory, is underlying basis, would require a full-scale presentation and is a task for another time. A lifetime? ? That task is so crucial, the gap left without the accomplishment so yawning, that it is only a minor comfort to note that we here are following the respectable tradition of Locke, who does not provide anything remotely resembling a satisfactory explanation of the status and basis of the law of nature in his second treatise. Chapter 2. Whew. Honestly, guys, though, I don't think I'm going to do this book tomorrow because this philosophy book requires a lot of thinking. And I mean, if you enjoy this, please let me know. Maybe it's just me. But honestly, for me, okay, I don't know how you feel about this, but reading to yourself, you get to digest it in your own mind and actually see what is happening on the page, and then think it through. Reading out loud, at least for me, it's more of a performance rather than a consumption of information. So me reading that chapter, especially just reading it through, I think I got barely anything out of it. If you got something out of it, awesome. But I didn't. So I'm going to have to go and reread that personally on again in my mind. So I don't think I'm going to enjoy reading that whole book to you guys. So I'm going to try a new book tomorrow. Maybe something not philosophical. I do have a book, Pet Sematary. I might read Pet Sematary. I got halfway through it. Maybe I should go all the way through it this time. Yeah. So I think that is exactly what I'm going to do tomorrow. But you should also push me, be like, hey, Andre, you got any other books? Maybe you should read this book. I don't know. Hit me up. Let me know what you think. But definitely, I don't think I'm going to read this book to you guys. I'm going to read it to myself. And then I'm going to digest it so I actually know what it's talking about, because I am very interested in that topic. But for now, thanks for hanging with me. Thanks for being here, saying words. And you know what? I will see you tomorrow to read you another book. And maybe before I go, I'll read you... Nah, I'm not going to do that. All right. Have a great day. Have a great night. Sleep well. Young ones, old ones, and the ones that are in between. I don't know. Goodbye. I love you guys. Also, remember all my fun things that I have on the side of the screen here. Come check it out. I need your help. I need your support. But better yet, I got a whole bunch of things that you can bring value to your life. Happiness, joy, interest, I don't know, a whole bunch of other passions. They're all over here. And if you want to learn something, let me know. I'd love to teach you. I'd love to teach you anything that could get you to your full potential. If you think you could do that, hit me up. All right.